And welcome back, everybody. Another edition here of the Auburn Undercover Podcast on the 24/7 Sports Network. My name is Nathan King, joined here by our publisher today, Ronnie Sanders. And we have a very special guest on the show for you guys today. Mr. Paul Finebaum joins us, obviously a great voice here in the SEC, has been for many, many years. Paul, first of all, thank you so much for joining us today. And how has this offseason been treating you? It's certainly a lot different than it used to be.
Yeah, Nathan and Ronnie, it's been really calm. Last year, there were so many explosions with the NIL and the Jimbo Fisher situation with Saban. This year, quite frankly, there hasn't been that much news, which is okay with me.
Yeah, I guess, how is the process of what you guys do over on the SEC network and at ESPN? How has that process really changed over the last few years with the emerge? I know everybody says, NIL and transfer portal, similar factors have been in play for a long time. But it really seems like this portion of the offseason is a little bit different than it's been before. Has that really changed for you guys, or have you done anything different in that regard?
Well, the biggest change is that, I started my career many years ago as an investigative reporter. And what you used to look into and try to ferret out. And there was a time back in the day when I was in Birmingham that I spent several months working on a story involving Alabama and NCAA impropriety. I don't want either one of you to be too surprised by that. And the idea that today it's perfectly legal, or if it's not legal, nobody cares, is really the biggest change I've seen. And it just doesn't matter. You could come to me today and say, hey, by the way, I've heard something about some player, getting this or that. And I would say, well, who cares? Because it's not going to matter. Nobody's going to look into it. And just like the other day, we saw the situation with Will Wade, the former LSU basketball coach. 25 years ago, he probably would have been drummed out of the business. Today, he got a 10-game suspension at McNeese State. And as soon as he gets to the NCAA there, he'll probably get a big-time job again.
No question. What do you think of what do you think Nick Saban thought when Hugh Freeze was hired?
I think he was bothered by it because Nick Saban knows how good a coach Hugh Freeze is. And I think we harp so much on, Hugh Freeze beat him twice. Well, that's part of the narrative. And we know that has happened so infrequently. But not only that, guys, Hugh Freeze is a respected coach to the degree that Nick Saban wanted to hire him. And the SEC wouldn't let them technically, even though, there was some gray area around that. He thinks the world of him. And he was more than happy to have Gus Malzahn down there those last couple of years recruiting poorly. And I can't tell you how excited he was to have Brian Harsin, who knew less about recruiting in the SEC than the eagle that flies into Jordan-Hare Stadium every Saturday afternoon.
Eagle probably knows more than Harsin did.
That is the rumor, unconfirmed, of course.
I think the eagle probably knew more people on the campus, I would imagine.
No, the Eagle saw more of Auburn just flying in than Brian Harsin did in 2 years.
No question.
Paul, how?
Back to you. I didn't mean to get off the subject, but he knows what a good recruiter Hugh Freeze is. He knows what a really outstanding play caller he is. He wouldn't have tried to hire him, and I think for the most part, Nick Saban has had it pretty easy at Alabama in relation to Auburn. I was around at a time when, and even Ronnie was, when he worked down there in the early days, where Auburn, Alabama recruiting was a big deal. Now it really hasn't been lately because Auburn has not recruited at the highest level. I can't remember. Well, I'll defer to you guys, but it's been a long time since Auburn recruited at the top 1, 2, 3, 4 level in college football.
It's been a long time, and it's Freeze has really been, to me, he's been really impressive the way he started out. You tell me, Paul, what compared from a fit standpoint, how does Kiffin compare to? How does Freeze compare to like a Lane Kiffin that everybody was talking about? I'm
glad you asked me that because I frankly think Lane Kiffin would have been a misfit at Auburn. I'm a fan of Lane Kiffin. I know what a good coach he is and how smart he is, and I like him immensely. But I thought that was the wrong move for him because Auburn is different. I will not sit here in North Carolina and try to lecture two guys in Auburn or in Alabama, how important Auburn fit is and what it matters. But I know, having covered that program for many, many years, that Lane would not have been comfortable there. And Hugh Freeze just dove in. He knew the terrain already. In some ways, not only thanks to being in the league, but being friends with Gus Malzahn. He saw a lot of Auburn, being down there when his kids went to school there and visiting with Malzahn. He understood the complexity, and it's a complex job. There are a lot of things you have to check, and he got all that he got all that before day one. Most people can get down there and adapt. It's happened before. I don't think it would have ever happened with Kiffin.
And we know it never would have happened with Harsin.
No, and I'm at a disadvantage. I mean, as much as I love to make fun of people, I genuinely like Hartzell. In fact, we texted not long ago. He saw me on something and was checking in with, he's. I mean, you don't want to beat up on this guy because he's like a lost dog. You just want to help him home, and fortunately, he's found his way home. He should have never gotten that job. I don't blame him for taking it. I do blame him for not making the most out of it, though, because I think he was a good enough football coach, X's and O's, that if he had hired the right people around him, if he'd been willing to listen, he could have been more successful. But it's over. So the Hartzell jokes will go on deaf ears, other than what I've already said here today.
How do you think, from an alignment standpoint? I mean, you've been around a long time. I mean, for me, it looks like Auburn is more aligned than it's been since Pat Dye, Bobby Louder days. I mean, what are your thoughts?
I'm glad you mentioned Bobby Louder, because I spent a lot of time around him in my career. And for all the criticism that Bobby Louder received, Ronnie, he was really a tremendous benefit to Auburn. He ran that program, and he had consensus on the board. Don't ever think he didn't. But there was no gray area. And a guy like Brian Harsin would have never made it very long. He would have never been hired, first of all. And I think with John Cohn in there, he understands the SEC. He understands small towns, how the political hierarchy is. I think the president down there, while not the critical factor in day-to-day, is important. And I say that because I ran into, I'll try to remember his name, but it was 5:30 in the morning about 2 years ago. I ran into Steve Leaf at the Charlotte airport. I was flying somewhere, and he was the former Auburn president, and he was still belly aching about how he was treated. And that's your guy. If you want to blame somebody for the last 5 6 years of Auburn football, that's your guy. He's the one that gave Malzahn the raise when he should have been fired. He's the one that brought in the AD that should have never come in, and he's ultimately at blame for the mess that Auburn's in. A president, no less.
No question. No.
Paul, how much do you think that aspect of things, at the end of the day, I guess what percentage of that would you say is important to a team's long-term success? Like, I mean, I think you look at what Nick Saban has done at Alabama, other successful programs. The word autonomy gets thrown around a lot. With Hugh Freeze in place now, that's not something we've really heard that much. We heard it about, with Brian Harsin the last year he was there. Oh, he doesn't have control over X, Y, and Z within his program. How much of that do you think is factual and actually, really plays a part in the success of a program? And how much of that do you think can be overblown in some instances?
I think it's critical. And what people don't understand is the president of the university is not down there at the athletic department every day, checking to see if everyone gets to practice on time. But he signs off on the people who do and is alerted when there are problems. And if there isn't alignment, it's a cliche phrase, but it's important and it's critical. You can't overblow that. And I've seen schools that have failed because there was not commonality. Now, going back, you mentioned Saban. What was the key to Nick Saban's success at Alabama? some people say, well, he's the greatest coach of all time. Well, he very well has turned out to be the greatest coach of all time, but he had an athletic director in Mal Moore on day one who understood him. Mal Moore's history, not to give a manifesto here on ancient history, was Bear Bryant's offensive coordinator. He knew the way the game was played at the highest level with the greatest coach. And Mal went out and brought in Saban. He convinced Saban that there would not be any interference. You had a president down there who understood that paying money was important. And when Saban came in, he went a step further. Nick Saban went to every booster club that mattered, and he read them the riot act. I mean, think about this. He literally walked in using foul language and said, you people stay the blank away from me. And what he meant by that is, I want you to support the program, but don't get in my way. I know what I'm doing. And that helped Saban develop a recruiting plan without interference. And I think that's always been one of the problems at schools is you have, it was always the problem at Alabama. You always had too many people in the middle of it. Now that really, Auburn has been more fortunate, I think, if you look at history. All the names that people get criticized, that you hear criticism of, Louder, Jimmy Rain, these in some ways are the folks that have helped the program the most. I remember running into Jimmy Rain about 5 years ago at an event I was hosting in Birmingham, and he looked at me and said, "Can you believe we just gave the football coach?" He used that phrase. I mean, he was the chairman of the board of trustees. He said, "Can you believe we gave the football coach a contract extension?" And I said, "I thought you were involved." And he just shook his head. And what he was talking about was Malzahn's last extension. And you can say whatever you want about Jimmy, but he knows football. He really does. And he and Louder together made a very good team. And they weren't the only ones. There were other people that had a seat at the table. But for the success that Auburn has had in football over the last 40 years is really due to those men understanding that you can't have too many people in the way. And I know that sounds contradictory to what a lot of people believe, because it's so easy to go on a message board and take a shot at the biggest and the most well-known and the richest. But in Auburn's case, those people have helped.
Remember when Saban was hired at Alabama, our friend Pat Smith called me. He said, "Well, what do you think?" I said, "Things are about to change," and they certainly did. And I think a big thing that helped Saban was that it was almost, I mean, you tell me, Paul, it was almost like Tuberville checked out at the end.
Well, Tuberville was obsessed with Saban. And instead of going after Saban, he sat around and complained about Saban. I know because I was friends with Tuberville and I heard this. And it's too bad because Tommy Tuberville was a good football coach. And he could have dealt with Saban had he not gone through all the Jetgate stuff. And listen, not enough time to go back and detail all that. But he was slipping. And that's how tough these guys were. The only mistake that was made, or the biggest mistake that was made, is that the university got involved in that. That you do that stuff back channels. You do not, get the president and the athletic director on the school on the school plane or Bobby Louder's plane and go up as a group. Tuberville knew about that before the plane got back, and he made sure that the world knew about it, which saves his job. Now, in fairness to Tuberville, he went out the next year and had a perfect season. It was unfair that he didn't win the national championship. Had he won, things may have been different, but he never could get over it. So by the time Nick Saban showed up, Tommy Tuberville was not recruiting well. He was gone. You're right, Ronnie.
Speaking of Jetgate, what are your thoughts on Petrino and Jimbo getting along this season?
Well, I don't have a lot. I haven't had a lot of encounters with Bobby Petrino, but the last one I did have was in Russ Campbell's office, Ronnie, who is a Birmingham attorney who represented Petrino. And Petrino was trying to get an interview for the Auburn job. I guess this was when Chizik got it. And he wanted to talk to me. I mean, he actually was so desperate. I kid you not. He wanted to talk to me and hope that I could help him. Now, I had no more influence than some guy on the street, picking up grass, picking up leaves. But I sat there and listened to him. He's changed. I genuinely believe Bobby Petrino is not the snake in the grass that he's always been. Now, how they get along, I think, will depend on how well the team plays. If they start falling apart, if Petrino makes the wrong call, then Jimbo will turn on him, and it will be a disaster. But I think it was a good idea, though, because Jimbo was out of them.
Yeah, I agree with you as far as the coaching perspective. I'm not sure how long they're going to get away. I'm not sure how they're going to get along personality-wise.
The good news for A&M, if Bobby Petrino does fairly well in his lane and Jimbo blows up, you can always move Petrino in, and he is eminently capable of running that program. I mean, there's not a doubt in the world that he could be a head coach, and I'm sure that was in the back of his mind as he was sharpening his blades before he packed his bags for College Station.
It's funny you say that. I posted on the message board the other day. Who do you think gets fired first, Jimbo or Petrino? Because if it's Jimbo, then Petrino takes over.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I mean, the money is enormous to get rid of Jimbo, but I'm of the opinion that he is going to get things turned around this year. But if I'm wrong, and that's about as easy to be wrong about something like this as to be right, then don't get hung up with the typical sports writer talk. Oh well, they can't buy him off. They can buy him off. We're talking about Texas A&M, and $70 million is a lot to us. It's not a lot to them.
How do you think, jumping out from A&M, how do Texas and Oklahoma fit, and how do you think, from a scheduling standpoint, how does it look going from playing 3 really tough games a year to playing 8 or 9?
Well, I think the second part of that is going to be dramatic because you're going to start seeing a change in the schedule record that we've never seen before. I mean, and it won't be as dramatic as we think it will, because if you go 9-3, you can still make the playoff, and the playoff is really going to override everything else. It's not the days of easy 12-0 records are gone. It would be extremely tough to get through that. But as far as Oklahoma and Texas, Ronnie, I think Texas is better situated than Oklahoma, which is surprising. But Oklahoma is one of these schools that still hasn't gotten over Lincoln Riley leaving because they were so invested in him, and they had that run of Heisman's and great quarterbacks. They had 3 straight quarterbacks who were Heisman finalists. 2 won the award, and they really lost a year in the translation when Venables came on board. I believe he's recruiting a lot better now, and I think they'll bounce back. But Texas is in a good spot now. Texas can't afford a bad season though, because Sarkisian is not exactly on a long leash.
Kind of on that same note, Paul, relating it back to Auburn a little bit, at spring meetings, that was Hugh Freeze's biggest focus when people were talking about the schedule. 8 versus 9 games. He said, well, look, I don't want to play 9 games and then be penalized for a worse record when in another reality, I wouldn't even be playing that many games. You kind of hit on it there by saying that that's going to be the bigger focus as you're looking ahead. I know it's, we haven't even played this season in front of us. But what were kind of your overall thoughts on that 2024 schedule for the SEC and how it shook out? And I guess how many SEC teams, you talked about it, a 9-3 team could get in pretty often from the SEC. How many SEC teams do you see maybe in that first year?
Yeah, I think realistically you're looking at 3. There could be outliers sometimes. And I thought they did a good job. They took a lot of heat for not going to 9 and being down in Destin that way, guys. I think the conference made the right decision at the moment. And it was kind of awkward because everyone kept, reporting that ESPN had not delivered on the money. So there I was working for ESPN trying to cover a story that involved my bosses, who were not exactly forthcoming in letting us know what the deal was. So I think this. I think the money will be there soon, and I think the number will go to 9 because I believe that it will not penalize them that much, and that's why they went to that super schedule you saw with Georgia playing Alabama, things like that. But when they get to the 9-game schedule, I think we'll be right back to where we were a couple of months ago when everybody was reporting what every school was playing in relation to the 3 permanent and then the 6 rotating. And I think it will shake out. I mean, the SEC, as you guys know, is a class system league where you have the upper class, the middle, and then there are those at the bottom who probably are not going to be helped by any of this, but there's not much we can do about it. Auburn's the one that I think has the most to gain because Auburn really is an upper division school that has played in the middle for a while.
Long term, what do you see SEC scheduling wise? I mean, do you see Tennessee and Alabama not playing each other every year, Auburn and Georgia? I mean, how do you see those things?
Yeah, I think there are a handful of games that are going to survive every year, and Auburn, Alabama probably would be number 1, and I think Auburn, Georgia is pretty close behind. That is a game that means a lot to both sides, and I think those games will prevail. Tennessee, Alabama is a tough one because Alabama is on Auburn's list. It's on LSU's list. So I mean, can you really realistically make the 3 permanent games for Alabama, Auburn, LSU, and Tennessee? Well, it looks like the league was about to, and that's what Saban suddenly decided he no longer liked something that he had been in favor of for 11 years. He no longer liked the 9 games. And I know that so well because I was the first interview he gave, I think it was in 2010 or 11, when he came out and said, we have to have 9 games. And he never deviated until about 3 months ago when he found out who his 9 games were going to consist of. But I think the league has to keep and preserve those. Everybody won't get 3 good ones because there aren't. Texas will, A&M will, Arkansas will, but South Carolina was a big loser. I mean, Ronnie, their 3 biggest games of the year right now in the conference are, I think, Tennessee, Georgia, and Florida, and they lost all of them. By the way, ask me if I care.
Speaking of South Carolina, what do you think of Ben?
I like him. At first I wasn't sure because he was this coaching search reminded me of some Auburn coaching searches where it seemed like the former players were making the decision as opposed to the suits in the front office. But it turned out that they knew what they were doing, that he had such an impact on recruiting when he had previously been there and had done similar work when he was at Oklahoma. And he spent a brief period of time, I think, with Kirby as well, that he came in, bringing a breath of fresh air. And just when you thought it was over for him, blowing a game badly to Florida, he comes back and he beats Tennessee and Clemson and pretty much cinches his immortality for a long, long time. It helped to have Spencer Rattler playing like a championship quarterback.
Paul, I got a big kick out of, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago. Okay, it was at spring meetings for sure. And you and Mike Griffith, and he said, I think Alabama still has a chance to compete for the West. Talking about LSU, obviously being the returning champion there from that side of the division. That's going to be a big storyline this season, seeing what happens there in the West. What are some other, as you're kind of just looking at a quick checklist for this upcoming fall, what are some other SEC storylines, maybe continuations from last year, new things that are coming up this season? What have you kind of got your eye on as we get closer to the season?
I'm really interested in Ole Miss. Kiffin's now making $10 million a year. And I say this as somebody who's already established my bona fides for him. What has he done? He ended the season losing 5 straight. He should have beaten Alabama. He didn't. So what can he do? And by the way, he also lost the Egg Bowl at home, which is something that you're not allowed to do in that state. So I'm watching that story closely. I'm watching Sam Pittman at Arkansas. Everyone loves him, but at some point you have to make forward progress on the field. Missouri is a conundrum. I would think Eli Drinkwitz is certainly feeling some heat based on, I know he got a contract extension, but we all know that doesn't mean very much. The A&M story has already been mentioned. That's probably the most intriguing story is what happens out there. Florida is fascinating from a Billy Napier standpoint. He's recruiting well, but he cannot afford a disastrous season. He's already had that, and another one would put him squarely in trouble. And is Tennessee back for real? Was what we saw last year the real deal? Can anybody figure out how to stop Heupel? I know those who are a laundry list. Probably you mentioned the story that I'm most interested in, though, and that's that. Is Nick Saban slipping or sinking toward the abyss? Is he losing his fastball, or was last year an aberration? And what's interesting about Saban, and I say this that I covered the end of Bryant, so I've seen this before. There are some similarities. It's very slight, it's very minor, it's hard to quantify, but you now have sports writers, sports personalities, even like Griffith, who's a unicorn, saying things like, "Well, maybe he's not the best coach anymore." You could not have said that a couple of years ago. And Ronnie, you work for the man. I've only covered him, but you can only imagine what's going through Nick Saban's mind, watching Kirby Smart win 2 straight and hearing this slowly but surely paper cut approach by the media on him. Most will defend him to death, but there are a few who are stepping out now.
You've gotten rid of a clown at Auburn, and the LSU situation with Orgeron has remedied itself. I mean, when you look at Freeze and you look at Brian Kelly, how much has the division changed, and how does that affect Alabama and Saban?
It's dramatically. And if you're handing out Bozo the Clown helmets, let's give one to Jeremy Pruitt as well. And what's happened? Tennessee lost. Makes a change. Saban loses at Alabama. Alabama loses at Tennessee. LSU. And again, I don't even consider the 19 season at LSU to be legitimate in terms of this conversation. We all know what they did, but that was a once in a generation team with Joe Burrow and everyone else. Orgeron had less to do with that than the players. I mean, he recruited them. I'm aware. So it's tougher. And I think the one threat that Saban really hasn't had is in state. And the Brian Harsin nearly beating Saban 2 years ago. What does that mean? I don't know. I'm in some ways I'm glad it didn't happen. It would have been a massive upset. But on the other hand, you tell me if I'm wrong or right here. But I think Brian Harsin would still be at Auburn. Beating Alabama would carry some weight. It wouldn't last forever, but it probably would have been enough to get him over the hump in the short term. But Saban has always struggled at Jordan-Hare Stadium, so that isn't earth-shattering. But I think what he hasn't had to deal with is recruiting with Auburn, and Auburn is now making inroads in that regard. And I think that's even when Gus Malzahn beat him every couple of years, it wasn't because of recruiting. Saban has almost always had the best team. We know that. He just hasn't always made the right decisions. Like, who's ever going to forget, putting a second back on the clock in the 2013 Alabama-Auburn game? Nobody ever brings that up, but you talk about, some of the stupidest decisions in college football history. I would put that one pretty high.
Well, and I think if you look back at history too, we mentioned Auburn almost beating Alabama at Jordan-Hare under Harsin. That I was at that game. I think it had more to do with Jordan-Hare than it did to do with Harsin.
Absolutely.
No, I totally agree with you. I think I saw you down there that weekend, Ronnie. And Harsin was he was using cliches like I'm not afraid of a fight. He didn't have any idea that was going to happen the day before when I saw him, or I think it was that morning when I saw him as well. But it happened, and big deal. That game doesn't matter now, but. I think, back to the original theme early on about alignment. And if you had told me during the coaching search at Auburn that while it was going on in November and early December, that sitting here in late June, early July, we would feel good about Auburn. It would have been hard to believe because who out there? Even Hugh Freeze, who was mentioned right alongside with Kiffin, there were question marks about. There were plenty of doubts about whether he was really the right person. There weren't any doubts from a football standpoint, but he overcame all that so quickly and so dramatically that it's never been mentioned again.
Yeah, I agree. I had my doubts, but the way that he's come in and really won Auburn people over, and he's, like you said before, I think he was probably a better fit than Kiffin. And even on the outside looking in, it was almost like Kiffin was a safer pick. But if you look at it from Auburn's perspective and the way things ended up, to me, it looks like that.
People mention, Ronnie, well, why didn't they go after Deion Sanders? Well, Deion Sanders, he and Kiffin are not the same person, but I don't really know if Deion Sanders was going to work well down there. I think he's brilliant. I'm a huge fan, but Auburn's different. I know that, having covered the program many years ago, having been there countless times. You guys know that because you're integrally connected to it. But ultimately, you have to get somebody in there who knows their way around. And if you trigger certain, there are landmines at Auburn, like there are at other schools. And if you step on the wrong one too soon, the chance of survival has been curtailed dramatically.
For sure. How long do you see Freeze getting Auburn to the point where they can compete for the playoff and make the playoff? And how long?
Absolutely, I do. All I can do is look back on his career, and maybe what he did at Liberty might be more telling than what he did at Ole Miss, because he took a program that was certainly okay, and he made them really quite good. And I think he did that because he was able to attract players. And I think that's the key. What did he do at Ole Miss? He attracted a different caliber of player. Those players that he had in 13, 14, 15, those were amazing players. And he didn't always get the most out of them. But he did enough where, you could tell this was a legitimate program. And I think Auburn is fairly easy to recruit to. And, now that Auburn has the alignment, and why do I say that? Well, because Auburn people are all in right now, and you can interpret that any way you want. But if your fan base and your alums and your donors are not all in, you're not going to win, because you have to have the money underneath to support the program. However it is done. And I was talking to Freeze in Destin recently, and I think he's even Hugh Freeze is startled by what's going on in the SEC, but I don't think he'll be startled long, because he understands what you have to do, however you have to do it, and interpret that any way you want.
What are your year one expectations for him, and what do you think would constitute a successful first season for him?
Yeah, I think my expectations are moderately reasonable, but I think a bowl game and maybe a little bit more than that would be great. And when I say more than that, 6-6 is doable with Auburn's schedule, but I think he can do better than that. I probably have them around 7-5, but in the SEC, he has to win the non-conference games. I think that's a foregone conclusion, and I think he will. What do you do with those tweener games? Those, the games that are the 50-50 jump ball games. We saw what happened. What was it last year? The year before, I can't remember, the Missouri debacle. They won the game, but it felt like a loss. And those are games that you absolutely have to win. You have to beat Mississippi State. You guys tell me if that hasn't been a problem lately. So you have to manage the bottom of the SEC and the lower half, and maybe pull something off somewhere. The fact that let me tell your audience something they already know, that 3 of Auburn's opponents are going to be ranked in the preseason top 6 or 7. Well, okay. Those are not games I expect Auburn to win. But after that, why not?
Yeah, and you mentioned the non-conference isn't bad for them this season. And we talked about it on your show not long ago. Paul, what is the difference that a quarterback like Peyton Thorne makes? Does that take you from 6? The quarterback position is obviously so important, and it's something that maybe Auburn fans took for granted a little bit when they had Bo Nix. Seeing what happened last season, now they're back to maybe having a serviceable to average quarterback, which is a luxury at times, especially when you look at Auburn recently.
Yeah. By the way, speaking of Bo Nix, I mean, he will definitely break the NCAA record of having started, I think, 10 straight years. I've never seen anything like him. But if Nathan, what you said is correct. If Thorne gives them one more win than they thought they were going to have, it's a big deal. And I think what Auburn needs, let's say they get 7 wins, and that would not be a surprise to very many people. Then, how do you get the momentum? You win a bowl game. I mean, it sounds trite because some of these bowl games really are not worth watching. But you look at some of the programs that have won bowl games in the infancy of a coach, and it really does make a difference. It carries a long way. And that's what you're trying to get right now. Auburn has had so little momentum in recent years. It's just been so dreary and so dull. So you have the fans are going to be there. Auburn fans are not going to bow out on Hugh Freeze. And I'll add one more thing, which we haven't talked about. And nobody can predict the end of Saban. You simply can't. But I would much rather be the Auburn coach beginning my career in 2023 as Nick Saban's career is in doubt than in 2013 or at some other place when Saban was ascending. His program is not ascending anymore. They may win a national championship again because that's often the end result of enormous talent. But this is a good time to be the Auburn coach because you're still young and vibrant, and your program has a lot of dirt to plow through. We don't know about Alabama's. We really don't. And even though you don't view Auburn and Alabama the way we used to 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or even at the beginning of my career, a little bit more than 40 years ago, it's still critically important in that state. And I will take my shots against Nick Saban today gladly, and I think Hugh Freeze would too. That's another reason why, when you asked the question earlier, how Nick Saban slept the night that Hugh Freeze was hired, I'm willing to bet not very well.
Speaking of the Ole Miss job and Lane Kiffin, and a lot of the Mississippi media has talked about, well, since Kiffin turned down the Auburn job, Ole Miss is a better job, and I've heard that over and over. Kind of been. What are your thoughts?
It's not. And my experience of this is now the second time I've dealt with it. I dealt with it with Tuberville because I knew Tuberville before he took the job and talked to him a little bit about going to Auburn. And he never had a doubt which was the better job, and I don't either. And, again, I'll spare you this is not a put down of Ole Miss. It's a great place. But the commitment at Ole Miss, I mean, it may be strong right now, but it's not easy to do. And so you have to ask yourself the question, why was Lane Kiffin even considering leaving Ole Miss to go to Auburn? And I think the answer is pretty self-explanatory, that he didn't have enough faith in the infrastructure at Ole Miss to fully support him to deal with what we are currently dealing with. Now, I will offer, in the last 6 months, Ole Miss has made leaps and bounds. They have moved forward in many, many different directions. But I still don't think, if you compare Auburn, what Auburn, the zeal of Auburn alums and boosters to Ole Miss, that it's a close call. I think quite clearly Auburn is the better job.
We got a couple more questions, then we'll let you go. But what do you see? Which SEC jobs do you see opening this year, if any?
Well, I think the most likely, if you're looking around, would be Missouri. I think that he's vulnerable. After that, I don't think there's a a red flashing light. I don't think Florida will open, in spite of the record, and it's not going to be very good. The Mississippi schools, I think, are in solid ground. Arkansas, a bad year would certainly create angst, but I don't think it would be enough. And I mean, I think you have to always, if you're a smart poker player, put at least one chip down on Texas A&M.
For sure. And then we'll wrap up with, we've had some questions on the message board since you outed me a few months ago. Tell us about Mildred from Tuscaloosa.
Well, my favorite story on Mildred, and Ronnie will hear this probably until the day I die. We kept getting this call, Nathan, from this woman named Mildred. And one day, Ronnie was up in the studio, and somehow the subject came up. And I said to him, I said, Ronnie, I don't know. I mean, this Mildred keeps calling, but I am not convinced that Mildred is really a woman. I said that with a straight face. And he just broke out laughing. So he said, hold on a second. And he goes in the other room. I'm pretty sure I remember this correctly, Ronnie. And you call in the show as Mildred.
I did.
And I was utterly humiliated, the fact that I've talked to this person countless times, and I'm saying that I didn't know, I had no idea Ronnie was Mildred. And then it became a problem, though, because once I did find out that Ronnie was Mildred, it made me nervous knowing what Ronnie was capable of doing as Mildred. And I don't know when the last Mildred call was, but it remains, there's some message board that still has Mildred phone calls up. It doesn't matter where I am, I will get questions about Mildred. And, you always hear people say, man, I miss the old Finebaum show. Well, so do I, because we had Mildred and we don't anymore.
Those were fun times.
Sounds like you need another one, another Mildred call.
And a lot of people really do believe that Mildred and Coach Bryant had something going on.
Not Douglas.
Well, what did you say? They were bumping uglies? Is that what
Bumping uglies? Yeah.
I don't know what the PG factor for the Auburn Undercover Podcast is. So I'll be a little more careful.
Overlords decide.
Well,
we'll send this off to them. They'll decide what to do.
Paul, thanks for being with us.
Ronnie, Nathan, it was my pleasure. It was a blast being on. Thank you so much.
Enjoyed it.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.